Okay. Well, so I guess I just had a couple of questions on the supply and demand aspect of
Yes.
the when it comes to the supply and the demand, basically the curves. Um, I guess I'm a little confused as to one in a specific scenario. How do they come up with the numbers specifically? You know what I mean? Is that or is that beyond the scope of this class?
You're asking how do they, how, like what, why do the supply and demand curves have the shape that they do? How do they, why do
Right.
supply curves slope up, demand curves slope
Well,
down?
I can understand how it slopes up or down. I guess my really my question is, does it account for so yes, let's start with that. Why does it slope up and why does it slope down? And I think maybe I have a confusion. So I'm
Okay.
thinking it's yeah.
Yeah, so let's start with the supply curve. And the classic the classic example I like to think about to remind myself why supply curves slope up is if you have a a bunch of agricultural land, some of it's going to be better quality soil than other parts of it, and so
Okay.
some of that land you'll be able to produce crops very cheaply because the soil is very good. You don't have to apply as many inputs. It's not going to be as rocky. You don't have to work the soil as much. And so if you plant on that soil first, you can actually produce at very low cost and and you'd be willing to sell at a very low cost. Of course, you'd prefer to sell at a high cost, but if the price is low, you could still make a profit because that initial land that you use is very high quality and low cost to produce. And so that's like the first units that you produce are going to be on the best land and you can produce at low cost. And then if you want to produce more, let's say you have 1,000 bushels of corn that you want to produce and you use the best land, but then if you want to produce another 1,000 bushels, maybe you have to extend your planting onto lower quality land, in which case the cost of cultivating that land is higher because you have to do more work to fertilize and to till the soil and make sure that it's prepared for the
All right. So
crop,
that
and so it's going to cost you a little bit more, and so you'd be willing to sell it um, at a higher price. Like you would require a little bit more compensation in order to use that lower quality land. And then if you want to
okay.
produce even more, so you have maybe 1,000 bushels from the high quality land, another 1,000 bushels from the medium quality. If you want to produce another 1,000 bushels, you've already used your best land. Now maybe you have to go on to the very low quality land, and that's going to require a lot of resources to prepare it, to till it, and fertilize it, and that's going to cost you more. And so you're going to require a higher price
Yeah, but
in order to
that's also assuming that there is a demand for it, right? So because no one's gonna put that work in if there's no demand for it.
exactly. So this is just like what's the minimum price that you would accept in order to bring that land into cultivation. You don't require that high of a price to bring the first high quality land into cultivation because it's very cheap for you to produce, but you require a higher price. You're gonna require that the price is higher if it's going to be worth your while to go onto that lower quality land and put in the extra effort to prepare that land to plant. So it's like that's kind of how you get the upward slope, is like the initial units that you produce are typically, you use the best land first, so those are very cheap, and then as you need to produce more, as you want to produce more, you have to use lower and lower quality resources because you always use your best quality resources first, and then
Mm,
any additional resources you use are going to be less quality because you always are going to start with whatever with the best you have. You're going to sort of
right.
order everything up according to the best to worst and start with the best, and then sort of gradually make your way onto the lower quality stuff. And that's why you have the upward slope of the supply curve.
Okay.
So if you
That makes sense.
to go back to your initial question, if you let's say if you um, wanted to put some numbers on that, the numbers of the supply curve would essentially be the minimum price that you'd be willing to accept in order to plant on that additional land. Maybe the initial plots you require a low price. Maybe you only require $1 or $1.50 per bushel because it's so easy to grow. And then for the subsequent land, if you want to produce more, you're going to require maybe $2 or $3 per bushel because that's your marginal cost. And then if you want to go on to the even lower quality land, you might require $5 or $6 per bushel because it costs you so much more. So in that case, the supply curve, the values of the supply curve would sort of correspond to the costs that you have to incur in order to grow on that land, produce on that land.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay. Well, so in that case, then, now can I, based on previous topic we talked about, is it also applicable to refer to those curves? Because I'm trying to see if I could link the lessons together.
Yeah.
Would then, in that case, can I say that the demand curve has a negative relationship? Can I talk in those terms as far as that? Does that apply to this scenario or no? No. When you talk about positive versus negative relationship based on how the curves go, does that same concept also apply to this lesson?
For the demand, yeah, for the demand, it slopes down, but it slopes down for a little bit of a different reason than
Okay.
the supply curve slopes up. So the demand curve
Right.
slopes down because the initial units that you consume, and so you can think of this either at the unit of the individual, so the amount of consumption that one individual has, or you can think about it for the economy as a whole. Let's start with the individual. Let's say you have water, right? The first units of water that you consume, the first liter that you drink to stay alive is very valuable to you. Your first liter per day that you drink is very valuable to you because it allows you to stay alive and to function biologically. So you'd be willing to pay a lot for that. And so for very low amounts of water, you'd be willing to pay a lot because you have so little. Once you have those initial 1 liter or 2 liters or 3 liters to stay hydrated and stay alive, then the uses for the water become a little bit less critical. They're still important, but they're less critical than the first unit. So if you have more than a couple liters, maybe you'll use the next couple liters for cooking or something like that, or washing, which is valuable, but not as valuable as for drinking. So the marginal value of that water beyond the first couple liters is a little bit less than the value that it had for you in the very first liter. And then as you extend that further, maybe you have enough for cooking and washing. Then maybe you want some water so that you can water your flowers or your plants and do some landscaping in your yard or wash your car, something like that, which has value to you, but it's not as much as taking a shower. You'd prefer to, if you had the choice between taking a shower or watering your plants, you might prefer to take a shower. So
Right.
in that case, the units that you consume beyond survival are a little bit less valuable to you than the units that you drink to survive. And then the units that you use to water your flowers or to wash your car are a little bit less valuable to you than the units that you used to take a shower or wash your dishes. So that's the reason that the demand curve slopes down, because like the small numbers of units are very valuable to you, and then the more you have, each additional unit is a little bit less valuable to you because you already have a lot of what you already need. You're just going to be using it for maybe some marginal uses in your life that maybe make your life a little bit better, but not critical for survival.
Okay. All right. So I was also having, because I'm a big picture kind of guy, right? When I look at numbers.
Sure.
So my thing with when it comes to, let's say, an example where you're comparing the price to the demand quantity, right? So obviously the theory behind it is the higher the price, the less demand is gonna that's gonna be, right. And then the
Right.
lower the price, you might have a higher demand than that. So I guess maybe it's beyond the scope of this class, but where do they come up theoretically? Let's say a company come up with that demand quantity. Like how does that data can come to be, knowing that um, I guess I'm wondering, is that via survey, or is it just logistically over time they compile all these numbers during different times? And then if that's the case, then how do they account for unemployment rates, right? How do would they account for things like, I don't know, the pandemic that just passed? How would that
Mm.
look in those graphs for a company? Because those were unforeseen events that I don't think were predictable in that sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, in some cases, you might do some market research. You might maybe do some focus groups or some surveys, especially if it's a new product, to kind of see
Right.
what people like and dislike about the new product, or what kind of how much you can expect people to maybe find it useful in their life. And so then that would give you some sense of maybe um, how much people are going to want, how many units people are going to want. Um, so that's one way to do it. I mean, you could look at past data. So the survey and market research and focus group, maybe it's like something you do for new products. For common products, one thing you might do is just look at historical trends, perhaps, and you can see, like, in the past, when prices were at a certain level, this is how much rice was being consumed in that
Right.
in that
Okay.
economy. When the price went up, you notice that people cut back on their consumption. When the price went down, you noticed it went up a little bit. And so you could maybe collect some historical data if you wanted to trace out the demand curve. But I think the most common way that this gets worked out is not actually through any formal analysis. It's just simply trial and error. I think there's a lot of um, just experimentation, and you retailers put out a certain amount on their shelves, and
Right.
they notice if it sells out really quick, they know that they probably had the price too low. They should increase the price a little bit so that the merchandise doesn't fly off the shelves as fast, and they can make a little bit more profit. If the merchandise is just sitting there, and they keep building up inventories and they can't get rid of it, they will realize, okay, we need to find a way to sell this because it's just taking up space in our warehouse right now. We'll have to lower the price in order to do that. So I think the real answer is more just kind of trial and error on a day-to-day basis. People are observing individual businesses are observing how much they sell at a particular price and making very small adjustments on a daily or weekly or monthly basis according to the reactions that they're getting from uh, the consumers who are buying their product, coming into their store and maybe buying their product. So I think a lot of it is some of that trial and error and just basic experimentation and uh, day-to-day operations. And then maybe
Mhm.
there's also some extent to which you can try to forecast and try to, okay, if you know that a storm is coming, um, maybe you know that that's going to result in a lot of people wanting a particular product
Right.
to protect
So kind of
themselves,
like
or
kind of like in Florida, for example, right, which is
yeah,
where I'm originally from. So companies would want to make more water because they're expecting hurricane season prior to, right?
yeah, and it's actually, so there's actually one of the most highly demanded food products during a natural disaster. Do you know what the most, like, so Walmart and other retailers will often stock up on a particular food item during natural disasters or in anticipation of natural disasters, and it's actually strawberry Pop Tarts for some reason.
Really?
They're very storable. They taste good. They
Right.
last a long time. They're easy. They're packaged individually. You can have them for breakfast. You could have them for a snack, and so it's
Right.
actually like no one told them that necessarily, but they noticed that, retailers noticed that during natural disasters and the lead up to them, those are products that end up selling really well. And so then, next time that a storm is coming, Walmart is going to like know that, okay, there's going to be people that are probably going to want more of these particular products. We're going to make sure that we can supply those in anticipation of this event that we expect to happen in the future. And that's another way, is like just kind of a little bit of forecasting, and so knowing what's happened in the past.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Um, and then another concept that it's not, I was, it's a little confusing to me looking at it for face value, but the difference between shifting the curves entirely or like shifting something along the curve. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I guess I'm not grasping. To me, every time I do it, and more often than I would want to, I would estimate the wrong shift, and I don't know how to approach looking at it that way.
Right. So just one way to think about this is anything that might change the quantity supplied or demanded other than the price of the good itself is something that could shift the curve. So in the case
So you
of
mean,
the
so in the case we're talking about right now, you're talking about in terms of like we just talked about, like the natural disaster itself, price,
yes,
whether a demand or a supply is needed for that product.
yeah. So in anticipation of a natural disaster, people are going to want, like, even if the price doesn't change, they're going to want more of particular things: lanterns,
Okay.
batteries, strawberry Pop Tarts, other kinds of canned goods, perhaps. So they're gonna want higher quantities, even at the same price that the goods were before. So if they want higher quantities at the same price, that's got to be a shift in the demand, because the price is fixed. You're just wanting more of the stuff at that price. If the price itself is going up, then people are deciding for themselves, do I really need this as bad as I thought I did? Some people will still want it and still need it. Others at the margin of that consumption decision will decide, I maybe I don't need this that badly. I'd rather spend the money on something else. This is pretty expensive at the moment. That's a movement along the demand curve where people are cutting back on the stuff as a result of the change in the price, whereas the shift is happening for some other reason than the price being changed. Any
Okay.
other reason besides the own price of the good itself is something that shifts the curve.
Okay. Now, is there a possibility you could have something that does both? Let's just say, for example, I don't know, a new technology is developed, right? In this case, then the technology, even though the technology specifically doesn't change the pricing, let's say it's a technology, a piece of technology that's going to make the production of the product more efficient. Now, it might cost
Sure.
the company more money to purchase that. In some way, somehow, they have to make their money through their product, right?
Right.
So, sure, the changing technology to some degree, I think, in my opinion, would probably shift the curve. But unless the company themselves choose to change the price of the product, then it's also not going to change it along it. But if they do want to make up for that cost of the new technology, then is there that possibility that we could say yes, both the curve as well as we're shifting the price along it? You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, I do. And I'm curious, do you have any visual right now? Are you able to see any of my screen or anything that I draw on the screen?
No, I don't. I'm purely on
Okay,
the phone.
I'm gonna try. So I guess what I would say, if you go back to some of the, I believe it's the lesson 3 videos, um, I think Professor McLeod illustrates this with a shift of the curve, either, so let's say a shift in the supply curve. You just mentioned technology improves. So that's going to shift the supply curve to the right and down,
Hmm.
either to the right or down. It's moving down because costs essentially have been reduced. Remember, the supply curve is a representation of the marginal costs of
Right.
production. So if technology improves, that lowers costs, that's going to shift it down. And it's also, you can think of it as a shift to the right. Those are both equivalent ways of thinking about it. So if the supply curve shifts to the right, um, it's going to intersect the demand curve at a different point than it did before. And you actually get a movement along the demand curve from the initial point to the final point. And I think there's
Okay.
actually one of the videos he draws some arrows to kind of show the dynamic movement of the price from the initial point to the new point, which is the movement along the demand curve that results after the shift in the supply curve happens. So when you have one of those shifting situations, you have both of those at the same time. Essentially, you have the shift, and then you have the price adjustment to restore equilibrium, which is a movement along the demand curve or the supply curve, depending on whether the demand curve shifted. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So that, like, the shift in the curve is like a shock. It's a shock to the system, and then the movement along the curve is like restoring equilibrium after the shock. Okay, so did that answer your question?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
So additional questions that I have, concept of the whole class,
Okay.
and it's just general looking forward.
Yep.
Are the midterms and the final, are they gonna be similar in style of question as the quizzes? So meaning when I'm studying, can I use the quizzes as a study guide to be able to be successful on the test, on the midterms and finals?
Yes. Yeah. The questions on the midterm are very similar to the style of questions that appear on the homeworks and quizzes. It's going to be a mixture of just kind of straight up multiple choice questions with conceptual kinds of questions, and then some multiple choice questions where you have a selection of numbers that maybe you have to choose after calculating something or determining something with economic logic. I think there might be some fill in the blank ones where you put in a number. So it's in short, yes, the style of those midterm questions are going to be very, very similar to the homeworks and quizzes.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you answering all these questions, and
Yep.
uh, obviously, I actually appreciate that. I think this is the first class at Penn State that kind of has this option, the Zoom option, that I've been at Penn State. So I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Sure. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, good to meet you,
Yeah,
Diego.
yeah, no problem, man. Hey, so I'll stick around on here, see if anybody else come along, and maybe if they have some questions, I can listen in.
Great. That sounds
Yeah,
good.
right. Yeah, thanks, man.
Yep. So Rose, do you have a question? Do you go by Rose?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, I thought
And I do have a
yeah,
question also.
great.
Thank you. So, hold on. Okay, so my main question was, I'm not sure if this was like supposed to be obvious, but on the one quiz, it says the market demand curve for Cheerios is the sum of the quantities of Cheerios that all households in the market demand. And I was just hoping maybe you could explain that a little bit more, because I thought that each household would demand a different quantity, so it would be the average. I thought it was the average of quantities. that households in the market demand?
Yeah, I didn't like that question very much. I would, yeah. So I would have preferred if one of the options said the total quantity that would be consumed at a given price.
Yeah.
At each given price. It's because it's a schedule. It's a map between a price and
Right.
a total quantity. So I I was a little bit disappointed with that question. I didn't think that it was
Okay.
very clear. But so let me try to. Okay, so the reason that I'll try to do this without drawing. I'll try to just use words. The reason it's the sum of all the quantities. Well, actually, would you mind just reading the words of the question one more time so I can address it exactly?
I can share my, or no, I can't share my screen.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay.
It says the market demand curve for Cheerios is the sum of the quantities of Cheerios that all households in the market demand.
Yeah.
And then there was other options like the sum of the prices or the average of the
Yep.
prices, but I was just confused how the sum of the quantity. I thought it would have been the average of the quantities just because my thought process was that each household under different circumstances would demand a different number of Cheerios. And so like I don't know. I
Yes.
wasn't sure about.
Yeah. So individual people have their own sort of personal demand curves, which represent how many boxes of Cheerios that they'll want to consume at a particular price. But the market demand curve is like the total amounts. And so like if you think about the entire market for Cheerios, if the price is $3 a box, I might buy one box a week. You might buy one box a week. Diego might buy a box a week. And then so at 3 boxes per week would be sold at a price of $3. And then if the price goes up to $4, maybe you buy some, but I decide to drop out of the market. In which case, then it goes down to 2 boxes at a price of $4. So
Okay.
that would be like a shift or like a shift along the demand curve in the total market from like three down to 2 when the price goes from $3 up to $4. So it's, yeah, I guess the key word in the question is that it's the market demand curve, which means the total amount of consumption that you're going to see in the whole economy, or whatever subunit you're thinking of. You can think of it at the national level or the level of a smaller unit or the whole world. But
Okay.
whatever the relevant market is, it's how much is going to be consumed in total at a given price. And I wish there was just the phrase at each given price is the phrase that I would prefer was in that option, because it's not just a point, it's not just a total amount, it's a total amount for each price that is going to be
Right.
consumed.
Because I was trying to imagine what they were describing, which they had described the sum of the quantities, but I was trying to imagine that as a function, and I was so confused because I was thinking like the sum of the quantities is not a function. Like I
Yes,
don't know.
exactly
I wasn't
right.
really. I
Yes.
wasn't getting it. I was so confused.
Yeah,
Okay. Well, that makes more sense.
I chalked that up to a question that could have been written a little bit more clearly.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep.
I'm thinking that's all my questions for today, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, yep, no problem. Yep, thanks for coming in.